Welcome along, fellow time travelers. This time around, we're going to travel back in time and check out the homes of author J.R.R. Tolkien. So sit back and pour yourself a cup of coffee, or a tankard of tea, or a mug of mead, or a chalice of cider, or a flagon filled with any beverage of your choice, and join me around the campfire. Before we begin, will you kindly hit the like button and share this video with others? And if you want to listen to more interesting videos that I produced, please do me a favor and become a member of my channel. There's all sorts of great exclusive stuff, stories and other cool things. So go ahead and subscribe and become a member, and that would be awesome. Alrighty, let's get rolling. So imagine you are going to visit some of the homes of John Ronald Reuel Tolkien. Let's talk about this one in particular that's located 60 miles northwest of London. The 6-bedroom house on Northmoor Road, Oxford, was built in 1924, and Mr. Tolkien lived there with his wife, her name was Edith, whom he met when he was 16 and she was 19. And he married her in 1916. Together they had 3 sons and a daughter, and they lived at this house from 1930 all the way until 1947. Pretty long time. So check this out. Mr. Tolkien was born in South Africa on the 3rd of January in 1892. And while growing up there, his mother, Mabel, homeschooled him and, just homeschooled her children. She figured that's the way to do it. And she clearly did a great job. Tolkien had a great aptitude for art. He liked botany, he liked languages, and early in life he learned Latin. That's kind of cool. How many people learn Latin? He also liked to draw landscapes and trees. So life was really cool, but unfortunately, by the time he was 12 years old, he had lost both his father and his mother. And so then Tolkien grew up in Birmingham, and he attended King Edward School and then St. Philip's School. I could talk about his childhood forever, and maybe I will in another video, but for now, suffice to say that he was very well educated, clearly very creative, and certainly ambitious. And he went on to become a world-famous English writer, as you already know. And, check this out, for his writing, he was able to create his own languages. And I'm not going to say it was the easiest thing in the world. We know that's not easy. But he had lots of tools in his toolbox. He learned, you ready for this? It's a long list, so bear with me. These are some of the languages that Tolkien learned. Danish, Dutch, French, German, Gothic, Greek, Italian, Latin, Lombardic, Middle and Old English, Old Norse, Norwegian, Russian, Serbian, Spanish, Swedish, Welsh, and Medieval Welsh. Clearly there's a difference. So that's pretty cool. I don't know how many languages you speak, but probably don't know as many as Mr. Tolkien did. So in addition to being a respected professor of Anglo-Saxon and English literature, he was the author of, this is what they were called, high fantasy works, such as The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings. Now, right about now, you're saying, God, I hope Scott tells us what in the world high fantasy means. You're in luck. I'm gonna. It's a subgenre of fantasy, and it's defined by epic settings, epic characters, epic themes, epic plots. And the central character's on a kind of hero's journey, and he's representing a quest where good, it's gotta triumph over evil, because you got high stakes, right? That not only affect the hero, but sometimes entire civilization itself. So let's jump around a little bit. 1895, Mr. Tolkien, John, as he was called when he was a boy, and his brother, Hilary, and his mom, Mabel, they moved into a cottage in a place called Sarehall. And I'm probably saying that wrong. I apologize, anybody that lives there, but that's how I gotta say it. That's all I know. Sarehall. And it was a village, it still is a village, 4 miles from the center of Birmingham. And this area had to be really cool, because it influenced his description of the green and peaceful country of the Shire in his books. And then nearby, you had something called the Moseley Bog, and that may have been the inspiration for the Old Forest. In fact, Tolkien stated the following. This is a quote from Mr. Tolkien. It was kind of a lost paradise. There was an old mill that really did grind corn with 2 millers. a great big pond with swans in it, a sand pit, a wonderful dell with flowers, a few old-fashioned village houses, and further away a stream with another mill. So that's pretty cool, right? Between 1902 and 1910, Tolkien lived at 1 Duchess Place, Ladywood, Birmingham. And in case you're wondering why, it's because Arthur and Mabel, Tolkien's parents, came from that city. So Tolkien's experience of growing up and living in Birmingham had a huge impression on him and his life's work. And for a year, from 1910 to 1911, Mr. Tolkien lived at 4 Highfield Road in Edgbaston, Birmingham. And following that, and until 1916, Mr. Tolkien lived at Plough and Harrow, Hagley Road, Birmingham. And then, upon receiving his first academic appointment, Mr. Tolkien lived at 2 Darnley Road, West Park, in Leeds. Now, in 1925, or possibly 1926, no one seems to know for sure, Mr. Tolkien met and befriended the legendary C.S. Lewis. And it was around that time that he moved to 22 Northmoor Road, and that was his first home in Oxford. And then 4 or 5 years later, in 1930, he bought the house next door, 20 Northmoor Road, and he and his family moved right in. This was a large house. It was while living in this house, which, by the way, was built in 1924, that Tolkien wrote the whole of The Hobbit. That was between 1930 and 1932, and was published in 1937, and almost all of Lord of the Rings, and that was between 1937 and 1949. And by the way, in November of 1954 and October of 1955, the Lord of the Rings trilogy was published. So I've got something to say about this, which is a little bit different than you might hear elsewhere. I'm interested, as many of you know, in design psychology. I'm interested in learning about how creative and productive people throughout history have lived and worked. And so you look at a house like this, and you look at the type of neighborhood that it is, right? And clearly it's not the Shire. Clearly it's not this high fantasy world, because there's no such thing. But Mr. Tolkien was so incredibly creative. He was so incredibly productive. He was so incredibly imaginative that he could really live anywhere and be able to have these fantastic ideas in his mind for creating these fictional worlds. But he did it here. And that may be because of the great calm, the great beauty, the great serenity of living in Oxford, and to be able to have your own home, a beautiful home, and to be there with a wonderful spouse and wonderful children. And so it just goes to show you that anybody can really create anything they want to, and they don't necessarily need to blame it on their environment that they're living in, because sometimes we all have no control over where we live and how we live. But we can choose our attitude toward things, and we can choose our levels of productivity. Now let's move on. Mr. Tolkien was also an accomplished amateur artist, and in order to help visualize the fantastic scenes that he imagined in his mind, he would often illustrate scenes that he would then write about. And the publisher used the author's own cover art, as well as original maps that Tolkien drew, and also his full-page illustrations for the early editions of The Hobbit. Tolkien also prepared maps and illustrations for The Lord of the Rings. A little bit more about the house at 20 Northmoor Road. It was designed by Fred E. Openshaw for Sir Basil Henry Blackwell. He was the owner of Blackwell's Bookshop on Broad Street in central Oxford. You know the one I'm talking about, right around the corner. Most of the houses in Northmoor Road are substantial detached residences built between 1899 and 1930. And most of the earliest houses at the south end were designed by Henry Wilkinson Moore. Who was that? Well, born in 1850, he was a Victorian and Edwardian architect who designed a number of notable buildings in Oxford. Let's check out the house. So, the facade of this two-story house is of rough-cast brick and brick plinth. And now you're saying, what in the world are plinth bricks? Well, plinth bricks are kind of special-shaped bricks, and they're used for aesthetic detail, They kind of allow change in depth to brickwork that's normally at the base of the buildings, but they're typically used for windowsills and corbelling details and capping and curbs. And the street front. You can see there's a recessed front flanked by projecting gabled wings. And there's a plank door to the right of the recessed center with 5 light mullioned windows on either side. And there's also a 3 light window flanked by 4 light windows in the projecting gables. And looking all the way up, you can see the house has a tile roof. There are wood mullioned windows with leaded casements. And the interior, yeah, let's talk about the interior. This is incredible. It's actually been largely unaltered since the 1940s. And it's a big house, almost 4,000 square feet. That's cool. 6 bedrooms, 4 bathrooms, they're on the upper level, and you got 2 of those 6 bedrooms have their own bathrooms. That comes in handy. There's also a shared bathroom that features a roll-top tub. What in the world is a roll-top tub? Well, for the most part, a roll-top bathtub is a type of freestanding bath, where the edges are curved at the top, providing a very rounded look around the front and the rear. And so if you ever have the opportunity to take a bath in a roll-top tub, go ahead and do so, and tell us about your experience in the comments below. Now, on the ground floor is a drawing room, 28 feet by 15 feet. Spacious, right? Oh, the house has 2 reception rooms. Those come in handy. And in the kitchen, there was an old bell system that was once used to communicate with the rest of the house. And there are triple aspect windows and double doors that open onto a very spacious rear garden. So Mr. Tolkien lived there for 17 years before selling it in 1947. Why'd he do that? Well, 20 Northmore Road simply became too big and kind of costly to maintain after 2 of his sons had moved out. So he and his wife and his young daughter, Priscilla, and his youngest son, Christopher, moved to a tiny terraced house at 3 Manor Road that was owned by Merton College. And let's be honest, kind of sucks, right? I mean, have you ever done that? Moved to a really large house or a large apartment, and then you moved into something really small, and you're like, oh my God, how am I going to live like this? And so they did that, and they weren't too thrilled. So a few years later, in 1950, Tolkien and his wife and daughter and son moved to a larger house. This was located at 99 Hollywell Street, and that also was owned by Merton College. But you know what? The Tolkiens weren't happy there either. They're sitting around and like, God, this place is noisy. Oh, and there's so much traffic. And so a few years later, in 1953, the family moved for the 3rd time in 6 years. Have you ever done that? Moving is dreadful. And here this family is moving 3 times in 6 years. Some of you can relate. You know it's unpleasant. But this time they went to a home with a neighborhood that was much more quiet. That was located at 76 Sandfield Road in Heatington. And they stayed there for quite a while. In fact, 6 years later, in 1959, Professor Tolkien retired from the University of Oxford. And then 7 years later, in 1968, Mr. Tolkien and his wife moved to Poole, Dorset. And that is where he and his wife happily lived together until her death in 1971. And he stayed there for about a year. And then in 1972, he moved back to a flat owned by Merton College in Oxford. And it was there where he remained until his death in 1973. Now, because J.R.R. Tolkien was so incredibly famous in his lifetime and today, several blue plaques in England commemorate places associated with Tolkien, including places associated with his childhood, his workplaces, and even places that he visited. You know you got to be famous when they're putting plaques in places that you went ahead and visited. Now let's return back to 20 Northmore Road. In 2004, the house was sold to a private buyer for £1.6 million. That's a lot of bread. And at that time, it was designated a Grade 2 listed building because Tolkien lived there. And what does that mean? It means that, and this is a quote, the house is of special interest, warranting every effort to preserve it. And though many homes nearby have been heavily renovated, 20 Northmore is largely the same as when it was originally designed. And then in 2020, the house re-entered the marketplace. And then Project Northmore was created in order to kind of set up a literary center at the house devoted to Tolkien studies. But in 2021, its fundraising attempt to buy the house did not reach its goal. And so, in September of 2021, the house where J.R.R. Tolkien, this great genius, lived and worked, was sold to a new owner for £3,650,000. What does that tell you, everybody? Don't sell real estate. If you get a good deal, hang on to your house. I keep reading stories like this. You buy a house for practically nothing, then it's worth $1 zillion 30 years later. Buy a house, have a bunch of kids, don't sell it, leave it to them. If you like them. If you don't like them, then don't. But hold on to real estate as long as you can, because it just keeps going up, 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 up. Well, if you live in the right place. And so, this concludes this episode of Where J.R.R. Tolkien Lived. If you live in 20 Northmore Road, well, you know who does, will you kindly let me know? I'd be so happy to swing by anytime for tea and scones. Or just tea. Or just scones. Or coffee. And muffins. Whatever you want. If you live at 20 Northmore Road and you want me to come on over for any reason, I mean, to talk. But snacks are up to you. Drinks are up to you. Whatever you want. You're in charge. I'd be so happy to swing on by. I really would. So just let me know. Hey, listen, if you have any thoughts about the subject matter, please put those in the comments below and share what's on your mind. I'm talking to you right now. If you hear me, you know I'm talking about you. If you enjoy this video, please share it. Seriously, please. Just share it with other people. You've got to know other people that are interested in historic homes, architecture, J.R.R. Tolkien, stuff like this. Please share it. Give it a thumbs up. It'll take you a second. Thumbs up. And subscribe to my channel. Costs you nothing. It would really help me out. Subscribe and become a member. It's like $1. $3, $5. You could choose different levels. And people at different levels get different types of stuff. So yeah, if you could become a member, that would be so cool. I'd appreciate it. Also, are you like me? Do you have trouble relaxing or sleeping? If so, check out my sponsor in the link below. Their products work awesome. If they didn't, there's no way I'd be promoting it. I mean, yes, I've got friends who own the company, but still, I've got friends who own lots of companies. It doesn't mean that I tell people to go to their stores or buy their products. Trust me, I don't. But these people are great. Go ahead and order their stuff. It's awesome. Please do yourself a favor and go to a local shelter and adopt a cat or a dog, or a cat and a dog, or more than one cat, or more than one dog. Whatever you want to do, or some other furry friend, whatever they've got there, go ahead and adopt it. That would be awesome. You'll be glad that you did. Until next time, I wish you safe travels on all your journeys.